We're live.
We are live. Fantastic. Live on at noon Central European time. So yes, so welcome to those of you who are also live with us. Quick introductions for those of you who may not know us. I am one of two CEOs at Thriving Talent. My name is Deborah Croft, and I'm in a very privileged position. I'm speaking in my native tongue of English, but actually based here in Switzerland. And really delighted to be talking about this topic with colleague, team member Eleanor, because it's such a relevant topic for me as an individual in terms of my own journey and the different generations. I'm in the generation known as the baby boomers, and the fact that it's become such a interesting topic across all of our clients and events we go to. So really looking forward to be engaging on this with you, Eleanor.
Thanks, Debbie. So my name is Eleanor. I'm head of client accounts at Thriving Talent. So I look after a lot of our existing client business, which is why I also know, like Debbie just said, right, a lot of the companies that we work with do kind of have this topic of ages and or generations, either in their mind or even already as part of a kind of a DEI strategy. And on a more personal level, I'd be considered a millennial. I was reading about that before. The description is not necessarily very positive of what millennials are seen as, right? So I think I'm actually here also a little bit to represent the position that we shouldn't be talking about this generational thing too much. And actually this, how the labeling and stereotyping of generations is maybe not so helpful, or not always helpful, let's put it that way, right?
Yeah.
And maybe before we get into the conversation, just to say, if you are with us live on LinkedIn, please do use the comment function below the live stream to say hi, to add your thoughts, to add your questions. If questions do come up, we're happy to answer them within the next 28-ish minutes.
Thank you.
All right, Debbie, I think we've already started talking a little bit about kind of why we decided to have this as a focus topic today, but maybe you want to just spend a minute more saying what's kind of the context and why are we here talking about multi-generations and sort of building bridges today.
Yeah, thank you. Well, if you think of the mission of our work and the purpose of Thriving Talent is, of course, it's really about helping other organizations become essentially more humane workplaces, more humane workplace cultures, which really honors inclusion and equity. And if you think that's kind of the purpose behind why we all exist in Thriving Talent. And so when you look at it through that lens, for the first time in history, our workplaces now potentially hold up to 5 generations. And that in itself is, well, how fantastic from a diversity point of view in terms of all the different experiences and perspectives that we know that brings, if you can harvest them, of course. And of course, it also brings, challenges, because that does, any diversity will bring diverse needs and expectations. And so the timing, if you like, is really pertinent. And I think that's why, as you say, many of our clients have been asking us about this. Well, how do we create a culture with enabling policies and processes and resources and leadership behaviors that allows you to feel integrated, whether you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And so I think that's why it really is the first time that we're in this situation. So we need to kind of get our head out from under the sand and think, so what do we do? How do we manage it? And, you mentioned this. Probably the first thing we should do is just make sure we're all on the same page. And in terms of, I've said there's these 5 generations. So, what are they? And what are some of the stereotypes? You mentioned you're a millennial. So what does that mean in terms of era? What are our eras and our generations?
Well, you have to help me a little bit with this one. I know, so the traditionalists, I know there are a few of those, right? You mentioned up until the 70s, because I think there really is, right? We are looking at also an aging workforce as well, right? With retirement ages moving back, and also just people wanting to be engaged in work longer in life, right? Because life expectancy is also getting longer. So there's kind of there's really that longer period available for work. And then the baby boomers, you mentioned them. I think that's your part. You considered part of that generation, right? Do you know what the stereotypes are of your generation, Debbie?
Well, it's interesting because we're kind of that post-war era. So, in fact, no, I'm Gen X. I'm just saying baby boomers. I mean, I'm still, I'm 51. So no, baby boomers are 46 to 64, but they're very much the post-war era, where actually it was William Strauss and Neil Howe who first of all came up with this generational piece, and they talked about different generations, but the baby boomers, there wasn't really a stereotype around them. It was a case of post-war. You kind of got to work, and this is before a lot of the big job losses in the 80s. And you joined a company, and you typically joined for life. I mean, you were there. You expected your manager to kind of actually be responsible for your career. You trusted that they would be there to see your career through. And it was very normal to be in the same company for 30 odd years. So that's the baby boomers. But then, no, I come into Gen X, 65 to 80. And again, that was when we started seeing a little bit of shifts in terms of, is that how it's going to be around people being in the same organization forever? Still similar ways of this kind of fast track, education, go into the workplace. So still a little bit of expectations around your manager is the expert and knows much better than you. And in a way, the number of years in a company would be a reflection of your expertise. It was more about time rather than technical or digitalization context, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think to connect to the next one, it's great because could be considered millennial, and now we have millennial is also considered Gen Y, and now we have Gen Z and the new generation, Gen Alpha, they're called. And I think just to show these stereotypes and also the impact they have, from my perspective, previous generations are also defined by a situation of quite a lot of privilege, right? So that having that job security, knowing that you can join the workforce, that there are jobs, and that if you're in that job, you're in it for life, right? There's not maybe so much that concern of also losing jobs. There was a level of financial security that a lot of people my age and younger maybe didn't have in terms of pension, in terms of being able to buy property, in terms of all of those kind of things, but also the economy, being post-war and maybe not in a time, the currently not time of big wars, but smaller wars, and or certainly troubled times in the world as well. So there's kind of that a little bit of a disparity, also feeling actually previous generations were maybe more privileged, which we'll talk about that later, right? Some of these stereotypes are exactly those challenges of collaboration, and also, is that really true? I mean, being a post-war generation, I don't really consider being a privilege, right? There are other troubles going on during that time. But yeah, certainly I think the stereotypes for my generation, Gen Y or millennials, Gen Z, and even youngers, are a little bit that being on the one hand, being digital natives, right? The being born into a world of technology, growing up with internet, computers, all of those things, being super tech savvy, maybe not so concerned about changes in technology coming in with AI and all of those kind of things. And at the same time, maybe the negative stereotypes, right, are those around kind of being a bit more entitled, having the feeling that you deserve, or that the workplace is also serving you somehow, and not only you're serving the workplace. At least that's what is said about the younger generations, and we'll talk a little bit about whether that's really true, or what that really means when people say that, right?
Yes, yeah, exactly. It's very much, you've done a great job of saying, well, these are the these are kind of the stereotypes for each generation. And of course, there's a big debate really around generations, and people are pro generation theory or against it. And I think it's touching on some of the points you make, that there is some reasons why there's a grouping together based on era, and equally we can't assume that everyone in the same era has the same thoughts or needs or expectations. It does tweak. But at the same time, I know that you were recently at an event, and again, this theme of generations comes up a lot. And there was some evidence which was actually showed that negated the kind of generational stereotypes, and it said that actually they don't really exist. Can you remind me some of that conversation that you were privy to?
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's really interesting. So like you were just saying, right, there are different eras, but maybe not so much the generations. And that's what research kind of looks at is, firstly, it's difficult because generations are not super clearly defined, right? When do they start? When do they end? Kind of what are those ages that really go in there? And research that looks at the needs of different generations, especially now in the workplace, right? We're focusing much more on the workplace and kind of what they value, also in terms of, career progression, pay equity, having an employer that's kind of fair, that's all of those kind of things. There's actually not significant differences between the generations in terms of those expectations towards an employer. The differences within a generation are just as significant as the one between generations. So someone my age, and I think that's really an interesting thing, someone, for example, my age, who maybe comes from a different educational background or maybe grew up more rurally versus or in a more kind of urban setting, right? They have a different set of values than I do, but they're the same generation, right? So we see those differences even within a generation. And so there's some, from researchers, kind of that call to caution a little bit about stereotyping too much or kind of siloing too much and putting a lot of focus on that kind of closed pot of generations that sit within a certain age bracket. And actually what a lot of the research says is there are differences, but the differences usually come from the age you are to some degree, or the life phase maybe that you're in, and that does shift over the career, right? That because different things are happening in your life, and personal priorities change a little bit as well. Values change, right? We don't necessarily have the same values with 20 as we do with 50, and with that, kind of also our needs in the workplace changes. But that could be similar for me and for you, right? Not just because we're in the difference is not the generation. The difference is that I'm, of a certain age and a different phase in life, and you're in a different phase in life and have maybe some needs are the same and some are different, right? And I think that's a really interesting dialogue to have, to think actually of where people are in life and what does that mean in terms of their needs or expectations, priorities, values, etc. And at the same time, not negating certain needs that, people of a certain age, again, not necessarily generation, but things like the digital savviness I was mentioning before. So people who didn't grow up like I did, already having computers and the internet and everything as part of my life from a young age, maybe do find it more challenging to get into a world of work that is, for example, based on remote working, that is, lots of kind of online based tools, we don't do no more paper, all of that kind of stuff. But that's not so much a generation thing, right? It's a technological shift. I also don't understand TikTok, so like
but this is it with the alpha. It's changing, and it reminded me of one of the kind of academics and authors on this topic, a lady from the States, Lindsay Pollock, who you may have heard of, and many who are listening. And I remember she shared a story about her daughter. I think she said she was around 10 or 11, so she'd be in the alpha. And she shared a story that she went into a hotel room and said into the air, Alexa, what time is it, or something. And Lindsay Pollock was suddenly realised, my goodness, that's just her expectation. That whereas it was a hotel which still had like the old-fashioned telephone, the landline on the table, that wasn't on her radar. And I think, I know we want to move to the bridge. How do you bridge? And if we think of the kind of pro-generational, not stereotyping, but pro-generational theory, then, as you say, there are some collective reasons. So, technology is one. As you say, digitalization has changed the workplace, and it's really expectations. And I think that that even links to what one can assume nowadays. So if you think, going back to traditionalists and baby boomers and even Gen X, there is outside of your obviously scientific or technical field, then, as I said, years counted for experience. Whereas, of course, now in workplaces, multi-generational workplaces, you can't assume who the key leaders are, because one of those leaders might be extremely strong in digitalization, and maybe they are the youngest person in that room. So there is a point that actually digitalization, historically it was based on skills learned, and that's changing. I think, again, if you look at clustered groups, it is safe to say that, up until about the 80s, when, before a lot of big cuts across the globe that you started to see in the workplace, there was an expectation that you were in a workplace for a long time, and that your boss, your manager, even the word boss was used because they were the boss, they were in charge, they were the person who would drive your career. So again, it wouldn't be a surprise necessarily if there is a group, a community who haven't changed that perspective and continue to expect the boss to be the authority and to drive their career. And then that comes into, as you say, millennials or Gen Y and Gen Z coming in, and they've been taught, thankfully, that actually you empower your own career. So it's okay to say, right, this is what I'd like. So there are some differences around how you perceive leadership as a cluster. And I think if we segue to, so the bridge, we have to segue. I don't know if you've read, or our listeners have read, the 100-Year Book. I read that. I really loved that book. I'm a mum to an 18-year-old next week, and Alexandra is 15 and a half. And I read this book about 3 or 4 years ago, and it really made me take a step back. And because the generation coming up now, so I suppose Alpha, are the generation who are going to have at least 2 or 3 careers and likely work till they're kind of in their 80s. So it won't be such like like a sprint, education, university, master's, PhD, get into the workplace, be a hyperachiever, and goodness knows what else. There's a feeling that there's going to be a bit more about, okay, I'm going to take it at my pace, I'm going to ask for what I need, I'm going to make some conscious choices that allow me to integrate my job and the rest of my being. It's changing, and I think that's what we need to focus on. And maybe in our last 10 minutes together, think about, well, okay, so how do we start bridging? Against, as you say, people who are in the different life phases, as well as eras.
I think absolutely. And I think it's maybe important to mention why we maybe think organizations should do this, or in a sense, not to be like fear mongering, but what is the concern if organizations don't kind of address this the right way, right? Firstly, we are in a time of talent shortage, right? Where it's challenging. So also widening the lens to think about who fits with in what roles, also, without kind of having too many stereotypes about exactly your example, right? For example, what does leadership look like? So a leader can be someone, depending on the leadership skills that you need, it could be someone in their 20s, or it could be someone in their 70s, if they have that expertise that you need, and everyone in between as well, right? There's some narrative around that. And there's also this, that we've mentioned a little bit, we keep on saying, right, this stereotype, and stereotypes always also bring a bit of a danger with them, right? If I already come into a room and I see that there are people there of a certain age, be it much younger or much older, or even also my age, right? And I sort of think, oh, that person's going to react in a certain way to something, or, oh, they won't understand that because they're of this generation, or because, younger people coming in, oh, they're all Gen X, so they're entitled, they're too self-focused, they're not, they're not going to be committed to our organization or willing to, put in the effort that we're kind of looking for. And there's a huge danger in that, throughout all kind of organizational processes, hiring, promoting, but also just collaboration, teamwork, sharing of knowledge, all of those kind of conversations as well, right? And so there's that sort of word of caution about focusing too much on generations and building up a few more walls by kind of accentuating those stereotypes, rather than, as we're going to look at now, kind of trying to break those down a little bit and think about, okay, what's the way we can engage in this topic and those different needs and expectations and skills, maybe if we want to stick with the technical side, without kind of accentuating those stereotypes that maybe are not good for collaboration and cooperation and conversations, and just having a good time at work, right, for everyone.
No, as you say, it's a massive learning opportunity if people are communicating and collaborating. You're absolutely spot on. And I think that one of the bridges, I mean, there are many. One of the bridges that I'll kind of kick off with is looking at this topic through the lens of caring in career. And the reason I say it, so first of all, let me just explain to those of you who haven't heard me bang the drum on this. Caring in career, so caring is multifaceted. It's self-care, it's caring for aging parents, often not in the same country as you are, caring for children of all ages and abilities, caring for pets. I think I might have just heard Rayo in the background. Yeah. Your dog, caring in the community. It's essentially whatever version of caring you have, and doing that and being that in alignment with your career. And it's one of the most inclusive equity, diversity, and inclusion strategies there are, because every single person can see themselves in it. And the reason I love this when we're talking about bridging across generations is that actually the focus is more on phases, life phases, and we can't assume what life phases happen. Some are anticipatory and some are not. So yes, you may anticipate a phase of becoming a parent in your 30s if you go with averages. So in Europe, average age 31 is 31 and a half to become a first-time parent. But the point is, we can be all in different phases, where we need to balance whatever moment that matters in our life with our career. And actually, that is irrelevant in the different generations. The timing might dictate who and what you're caring for. Hopefully, you're always caring for yourself. So that's a constant. But if you look at us at work, we're at different ages and therefore generations. And yet I've just popped out of a year of building a house, and you've just popped out of renovating. Yeah. We kind of know, what were our needs and expectations during that period, just because we're in a different era. So, the conversation, if it's more around, what your kind of needs and expectations as you navigate moments that matter. And as an organization, you look at, well, how enabling are our policies and our resources and our training and our leadership behaviors that actually allow people to navigate those moments that matter through all of their phases. Then you have a common conversation. And if you're educating your managers to have regular discussions in the team charter and the team meetings, so, okay, so what are the different needs and expectations at the moment? It raises conversation above age or era to, well, actually, this is what's happening in my life at the moment. And people don't always want to share the absolute detail, but this is what would make it easier. And for me, that automatically lifts it, doesn't it? As a bridge.
Yeah. I do think really that focus kind of on what's priority at the moment, right? Is it, and it's never to say you let one go completely, but maybe there are moments where your career is not so much in your focus, right? Not that, and it doesn't mean you're not engaged at work and not committed to work, but you're maybe not on that kind of steep career trajectory because you have other things going on, but you maybe come back to that career trajectory after those things have happened, right? And I think that kind of non-linear also way of thinking about careers and having those conversations about what is your understanding of the world, what are your current priorities, and seeing how, even if we have different priorities, I mean, again, you and I, right, you have kids, I don't have kids, you could say they're different, we have different sort of life models, and yet actually we just have different reasons for needing a certain level of flexibility, and we have to have a world where we can say, this is the flexibility I need at the moment, this is, where I'm capable of spending more time on something, or I need to spend more time on something else. And then the conversations suddenly feel quite familiar, whether it's you talking about, what you need to be able to support your girls in this kind of transition phase they're in, or whether it's me thinking about whatever caring needs that I have at that moment. And suddenly there seems to be quite a lot of overlap, actually, even if our life models are very different and we're different generations and different age, but suddenly it's all, there's much more of an overlap in that conversation, right?
Yeah, and it creates more of an engaging communication where people get to know each other. If we think of the learning opportunity that happens when you have different generations, yes, there's a technical learning, but there's also a life learning. It's just sharing. And that's why there's so much reverse mentoring and mentoring. And Martin in the chat, Martin, thanks for sharing the piece about the 100-year book. And as you say, focusing on stages, strategies to enable stages and phases rather than kind of era. And when I was at this event recently, hosted here in Geneva, and there was someone who came up to me afterwards who said what she loved about the caring career lens as well was that she was in her 30s, so you could automatically put her in a bucket of where she might be, according to an era. And actually, she was very appreciative of the company she worked out, which enabled caring career, because the global mobility clause allowed her to go to India, which was her country of origin, not to have children, not to be a parent, but to go and look after her grandmother for a week. And so the danger of always associating, well, you're this age or era, therefore this will be your need, is actually you're making incorrect assumptions. And I love that she brought that forward to me. And I think the other bridge, it reminds me of when we teach a lot around allyship, and we have our kind of 4 C's of allyship, and I think the two that really jump out for me as a bridge again is the curiosity as one of the cornerstones, and the compassion, and that curiosity is very much that, is, well, if you're encouraging people to be very curious across the generations, across all different groups, whether it's ERGs, whatever the group is, whether it's age or any other ethnicity or LGBTQ+, it's being deeply curious about, well, what is the world look like for you? How come you do wear headphones when you're studying? My perception is, God, I'd never be able to concentrate. A younger person might be, well, when I studied, I always had headphones listening to music. It makes me concentrate. So rather than judge that and shame that, well, why not get a bit curious? Oh, gosh, wow, I would never mean that. That's really interesting. And then you say, well, I use headphones when I'm running. Oh, you run, so it's a different conversation. There's a curiosity. And then the compassion, for me, again, comes back to this shaming thing. I mean, you mentioned a couple of labels that came with your grouping or generation, being kind of entitled or narcissistic, which, again, it's shaming that didn't happen before, but suddenly there's this shaming. And actually, what if we come in with a bit of empathy and compassion around, you said it beautifully when you said, well, the perspective from maybe baby boomers might be, we come in and we're all entitled, but actually, if I look at your world, it seems to have a lot more financial security, and so again, it's, what's the empathy? What's it like to be really tech savvy, and what's it like to not be tech savvy? So I mean, this conversation, I know we're going to carry on having it with our clients, I think, soon, aren't we? But I mean, it's just, we've only had half an hour. I think we could go on for a lot longer, I'm for.
We could continue talking for this a long time. Please do continue. If you have a comment or a question, add that. Even if we don't respond in the next 30 seconds, we'll make sure to pick it up after this LinkedIn Live, right? And Debbie, I think we should use the last kind of 30 seconds for a little bit of promotion, kind of, about what we do, maybe, right? Fair enough to share what we're good at. I think we can say we're really good at this kind of approach of working together at Thriving Talent. That's the one thing. So if you also want to know more about kind of just how we function and how we manage those conversations, that's something we're always happy to share about. And we do some work, like Debbie was mentioning, right, on that kind of navigating life transitions, on the topics of allyship, and really these kind of how to support those conversations and supporting each other, creating that kind of community of support at work as well. And with our clients, the companies that already work with us, we look forward to, I wrote it down before, on the 11th of June, right, we have an event coming up where we're kind of going to make this the focus topic, and here's some best practices on how organizations other than Thriving Talent also navigate these waters of, should we be talking about generation, should we not, and how to work it, or how to create a collaborative environment within that.
Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to that. I love those round tables when everyone's sharing each other, from each other. So yeah, I mean, there's so much to talk about on this topic. Do share. Carmen, Martin, thanks for your comments, and for any of you who are joining us live, thank you for being here. And as Eleanor
said, if you're watching the recording, just reach out to us on LinkedIn or wherever afterwards if you have comments, questions, curiosities. Always happy to receive that.
Yeah, and otherwise, let's continue to keep this focus on humanizing and nurturing these inclusive cultures, so that actually the age becomes irrelevant. Is what moment that matters to you in your life at this time, and how do you navigate that and still thrive in your career? That's really where I'd love us to be having our conversation. So any ideas, any challenges, share, and look forward to carrying on the conversation.
Absolutely. Likewise. Thanks, Debbie. Thanks for having me, or thanks for sharing this 30 minutes. And we'll talk to everyone soon. And if it's your lunchtime, enjoy your lunch.
Yeah. Bon appetit. Okay. Thank you. Take care. Cheers, Eleanor. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.